It's a great pleasure for me to be here for the very first time in Singapore. I never traveled so east so far in my life. And just in case you're wondering, I'm Brazilian, not the typical Brazilian you would expect. My grandparents are Japanese, so I'm a Brazilian Japanese. I've never been to Japan. Many people ask that. But here I am at Singapore, so I'm very happy to be here talking to you today. I try to share some tips from domain-driven design, clean code, effective Java, and lots of other different tips on how you can craft better code and how you can better model your business domain model in your enterprise applications. My name is Edson Yanaga. I'm a Director of Developer Experience at Red Hat. And my Twitter handle is @Yanaga. Just in case you want to follow me, I share a lot of content about DevOps, microservices, domain-driven design, best coding practices, career, and anything related. I also happen to be a Java champion and a Microsoft MVP. As far as Google can tell me, I think I can consider myself the only one, which is kind of a weird combination. I know. Yeah? And well, I'm a Java champion, I'm an MVP, and I work for Red Hat. How cool is that? Yeah? But, you know, it just means that the world has changed a lot, and I've been an open source advocate and user since my entire career. So I think it's, in the end, it all means that open source has won. I always believed that open source software development was the best way to develop software. And when the largest proprietary companies, software company in the world decided to do open source too, it means that in the end, we won. And by the way, I'm a Microsoft Azure MVP, mainly because I helped the guys from Redmond to add the Java support on their platform. So today we have another option for Java deployment in a cloud computing environment. Thanks to Microsoft, and thanks for them for accepting my feedback. So currently I'm also an Azure technical advisor for the Java platform. So they're always trying to improve the ways that we can deploy Java software in the cloud. And since I've been talking a lot about DevOps and microservices in the past, and microservices in particular in the past like 3 to 4 years, a lot of people discuss with me, how do I proper model my microservices? How do I decide which piece of my monolith should I be extracting? How do I proper implement low coupling and high cohesion in my software? And later, this is question number 1. Question number 2 is, but I still work with a legacy monolithic relational database. How do I split the data? Because the code part should be easier. I'm not saying that it's easier, but data is always harder. How do I split that? So I wanted to have an answer for that, and after doing a lot of research, I decided to write a book. And so I've just released a new book from O'Reilly, Migrating to Microservice Databases. If you want to get, if you want a free copy of the ebook, it's available on this URL, if you type the URL, or if you just go to our website, developers.redhat.com/book, you'll be able to have a list of the books. So Red Hat developers bought the royalties of the book. So they made it available online for free. But just for Zwock Singapore, if you happen to, of course, be here, O'Reilly sent me a box of the books, and I'll be doing a book signing just after the session at 3:30, 3:40. So if you happen to get there to the booth, I would be more than happy to sign some copies for you, and I hope you'll be able to enjoy that. Okay. And I always like to start my sessions with this quote from Forbes. Now, every company is a software company. You don't work for a bank, you work for a software company. You don't work for an industry, you work for a software company. You don't work for a university. You work for a software company, because software is changing the world that we live, and I believe that if we call all of this that is happening today, this new digital transformation, is because software is behind everything that is happening in this world right now. Some of the great examples of this new digital economy are that the largest car transportation company in the world owns those cars, which is Uber. But I learned yesterday, maybe except in Singapore, because cars are so expensive. So they told me that Uber now has a car rental company too, or at least some associated company. So maybe there is an exception for that. But they own very few cars, only Singapore at least, as I know. And the largest lodging company in the world owns no real estate, which is Airbnb. The largest online retailer in the world owns no stock, which is Alibaba. And the largest content network in the world produces no content, which is Facebook. All of these companies, they have something in common, is that they only exist and they are only enabled thanks to software. So software is changing the world that we live and how we interact with different people worldwide. And when we say economy, I'm one of those people that thought that economy had everything to do about money. But after reading some books about behavioral economy and behavioral psychology too, I just learned that economy has nothing to do with money, but has everything to do about people. So that economy just studies how people interact with other people, and they try to get a state from one point to the other state. And people have some motivations from changing a system from one state to the other. Some of these interesting motivations can be love, hate, power, and also money. So basically, when we're developing software, we as people, we're developing software for people. We're just trying to change the way that people interact with each other. And we can do all of that through software. I also like to introduce myself as a software craftsman, and we have many different definitions of what is a software craftsman on the internet, on books. The best definition that I have for myself is that a software craftsman is somebody who cares about his or her job, because we as craftsmen, we believe that truly that software can change people's lives for the better and also can make people miserable. So some years ago, I made a decision. I knew that I could create crappy software and make people feel miserable. I have to confess that I've did this before. I made people feel miserable with the bad work that I was doing in my job. And then I realized that if I'm going to do something, I better do it the best I can. So even though sometimes we fail, I'm always trying to improve the software that I deliver. And some years ago too, I decided that what I was doing wasn't enough, because even if I could be a good programmer, if I am maybe a good programmer, the job of one single programmer is not enough to change the world that we live. So I decided I would like to help to the extent of my possibilities, to try to help developers all around the world to try to deliver better software and faster. And I'm very happy that within Red Hat I also have the opportunity to be from the other side of the world to try to share some knowledge with you. So I hope that it's also useful for you what I'm about to share. And if you think about software as a craft, not an engineer or something like that, I know there are many different views of what software is, of what a software can be. So I can agree and disagree with most of them. But one nice view of what is a software process, or what is the craft or the art of creating software is from Donald Knuth. If you happen to be at the Museum of Computer History in Palo Alto, California, there is this beautiful quote from Donald Knuth on the wall, and I just took a picture for that, and I've just written here on this slide that computer programming is an art because it applies accumulated knowledge to the world, because it requires skills and ingenuity, and especially because it produces objects of beauty. If you believe that yourself is a software craftsman, if you believe that software can change the world, then very few things in our world can be more beautiful than useful software that is carefully crafted to help people worldwide. So that's why I think that software is very beautiful, especially if you care about the software that you're doing. And if you think about how can we change the world with the software that we do, one of the best definitions that I've learned in the past 2 years, I was talking to a professor in the Federal University of Uberlândia, which is a city in the countryside of Brazil. He gave me a definition of what is competence, but before that, I would like to give you another quote for Julian Appelo, which is the author of Management 3.0. No matter what other methods you apply to achieve competence in a social system, in the end, it all depends on whether people actually care. So if you're all here today trying to learn better ways to deliver software into production faster, more reliably, and trying to craft better software, I believe is that we all care about what we do. And if you think about what is competence, how can you achieve competence? I used to think that competence was something that was equal to proficiency, but then I realized that there are two completely different words and different meanings. Competence comes from the Latin competere, and I thought that, well, competence it must have something to do with competition, but then I realized that competere, originally in Latin, had nothing to do with competition. Competere in Latin used to mean that we are improving together. Okay, so if you think about competere or competence, competence means that you're fighting a battle against yourself each one of your days. And in the end of the day, if you're able to win, if you're able to be a better person than where you were yesterday, then you're a competent person, right? So competence has everything to do about improvement and not about proficiency. So for you to be a proficient person, you have to be, before that, a competent person, because you acquire proficiency through competence. And that's why we're here. We want to learn better ways and to practice better ways of creating software. One of the great techniques that I think that are overrated are domain-driven design, because it has been more than 10 years that this book was written, and we're still not applying the great techniques that domain-driven design has brought to the world of software development, and particularly software business modeling. So I think I'll be able to share a bit of the tips. But domain-driven design is one of the books. I read this book like almost 10 years ago, and when I finished reading that, I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. But when I went to my notebook and tried to code something, I realized that I had absolutely no idea how to apply the domain-driven design principles into my code. And that's one of the bad things of domain-driven design. Initially, it was too abstract for you to apply in practice. One beautiful day, and really it happened like this way because I was like digesting the ideas for a long time, for many years. One of these days I just woke up saying, oh my God, it seems so obvious now. I'll try to apply these things, and I'll try to improve the ways that I apply these techniques. So domain-driven design is a very big subject, and I'll barely scratch the surface of this during this session because I only have 50 minutes. But I decided also to write a book about the subject, so expect something more from me until the end of the year. I hope to have finished it. About how can you apply all of these beautiful concepts of domain-driven design into code, especially, which in my case, I'm a Java developer, into Java EE enterprise applications. So some of the code smells that I want to tackle today with you are like, first of them, primitive obsession, because traditionally in the Java world, and I believe in the other worlds too, we think about how we model software. We use with a code small called primitive obsession, which is the fact that in our domain model, we're just using primitive types from the language. So we're used to having, if we model a person, if we model a car, or if we model a book in our domain model, we're used to have properties as strings, properties as integers, properties as dates, properties as big decimal, which means that we create classes, but all of our properties on these classes, which represent real-world entities, are simply primitive values. And that's a typical anti-pattern. We should be enriching our model, so we should be creating more classes, more types to give meaning to the business model that we have. And this anti-pattern is, people documented that a long time ago. So one of the greatest articles by Martin Fowler was written in 2003, which is When to Make a Type, which basically, if you read the article, is a very nice article, but it states that if you're thinking about, should I create a new type in my domain model? And if you have this doubt, then you probably should. Because like in most of the case, you really should be creating a new type. And one of the reasons for doing that is that if you created a custom type in your business model, it's very easy for you, if you later realize that you didn't need that, it's very easy for you to remove the custom type. But if you realize later, if you use a primitive type and later realize I should have created a custom type, it's very hard for you to later add a custom type. So we should be have in mind that we should be creating custom types first instead of later. Other nice abstractions or problems that we could solve. The most popular exception in the Java world is the null pointer exception, okay? We have that like every day we see in our stack traces, and maybe we shouldn't need to be handling null pointer exceptions. I know there's not a single solution for that. I know there is no consensus which is the best solution for a null pointer exception, but when we're trying to model our business model, we can try to avoid null pointer exceptions up to some extent. We have some good solutions for that. Some languages provide like things like Elvis operator. It's debatable. I think it's a good solution for some use cases and a very bad one for others. We can implement null objects, which I think is a very good solution in some use cases, and again, a very bad solution for others. Java 8 and forward, we have like optionals, which again can be a good and a bad solution depending on how and when you apply all that. And I'm going to discuss some of these, some possibilities of how can you solve and improve your code and trying to tackle some of these anti-patterns or code smells that you have in your code. But instead of just talking, well, let's try to show you a cool live coding demo of how can we apply these techniques. So now I'm going to get to the risky part of this presentation, because, you know, demos can always fail, especially when you're live coding things. And let me open here. Okay, I have my IDE. I'm going to enter my presentation mode. Here I just created already the project because I have many other stuff, but I'm going to start with the basics for you. So first I'll create what we call a new Java class. I'll get a very simple use case. I'll create an order. And usually an order, I want to model that as an entity in the JPA world. And just for you to know, I don't know how many of you have heard about domain-driven design before, but some of the basic concepts that we have in domain-driven design, and one of the most important ones, in fact, is that in our business model, we have different types of classes and objects that can be created in our business domain model. One of these types are entities, and the other ones are value objects. If you think about the difference, value objects are things that are equal to the other ones depending on their value. So if I create a class, a value object called phone, if I have an object with phone value 555, and I have another object with value 555, I consider them equal, so they can be replaceable one by the other, and doesn't change the meaning of them in my business domain model, okay? So if I have a model like phone book, then if I create a phone class, if I have two instances, 555 and 555, they are equal, they are replaceable, they are interchangeable, it doesn't change. It doesn't matter for me which object I'm using, it represents the same idea in my business domain model. But I can have also entities, and entities are the things that are equal to the other by their identity. So if I create a person class in my business domain model, this person, I can change the name of the person, I can change the address, I can change the sex, I can change the date of birth. It is still the same person. So, okay? So all of the property values of the person class can change over time, but for me, it still represents the same person, okay? Because somebody might have mistyped, somebody can perform a sex-changing surgery, and can change the sex, but it is still the same person, so it has an identity. So entities have identities. We also have another concept, which is an aggregate, which is the root of our abstraction as a bounded context, but I won't be able to cover that today. So for now, we'll just learn the difference between entities and value objects, and it is very useful for us, okay? So order is something we could discuss. Order, is it a value object or is it an entity? If you think about an order, the state of the order changes over time. You mean I created an order, maybe I can add an item to the order, maybe the order can be fulfilled, maybe the order can't be sent, maybe the order can be cancelled. So the properties of the order can change and evolve over time, but it's always the same order, right? So apparently order seems to be an entity, so we'll model that as a JPA entity too. So it must implement serializable, it must be an entity. What else? An order should have an ID because it has an identity. For now, I'll just keep using primitive types, even though I know it's a bad practice. It must be a generated value. Maybe an order must have a number. private integer number. And maybe I should be creating getters and setters. That's one of the things that I like to discuss. If you think about how do you model, traditionally, what do we do with the business code that we craft? Traditional Java EE development, when you have, like, you create classes with lots of properties, primitive properties, you create the getters and setters for everything. Then if you want to manipulate business logic, what do? We create a service class, which is used to be an EJB or a transactional bean in Spring. Then we create business methods on this service class. And each one of these methods are very, very huge, because what do? We extract the information from inside the bean, get everything, perform some calculations. Then when we have the result, we get our class back and set everything else. That's the typical use case of an anemic domain model, and that's what we're trying to avoid with domain-driven design. Because if you think about it, most of the problems that we have, most of the bugs that we have with system in production is that you think about something, your system, the data evolves over time, and usually when you have bugs is because the state of your data went to a certain state which was unpredictable. It was never supposed to have this state. That variable should never have that value, but it happened to have that value. And you have absolutely no idea of how your system reached that state. Because since all of your properties are exposed, any code in your entire system can get and set a value inside your class and change the state to an unmeaningful or unpredictable value, and you have absolutely no idea of how that property received that value. So we should be defending our domain model from this kind of changes. So the most powerful aspect of any object-oriented language is the power of encapsulation, and that's one of the things. I used to be a professor also for more than 15 years in the past. And I used to teach graduate and undergraduate courses in different universities. So one of the very first things that people learn when trying to learn like Java as any object-oriented programming language, if you think about what are the characteristics of object-oriented programming languages, are that you have inheritance, polymorphism, and later they learn, oh, you can encapsulate too. When in fact, the most important aspect of any object-oriented programming language is that you can perform encapsulation. You can insulate your data from unexpected change of state. But we don't do that. We should be doing more. So I like another quote, which is, mutability is the new go-to. So the less mutable you make your code, the more protected it becomes. So how can we reduce this mutability? The first thing is that you don't automatically generate your getters and setters. You have to think very carefully about should you be creating a getter and setter. Some people advocate that you shouldn't even be creating these kind of things. But another great tip from domain-driven design is that Java has one specification called Java Beans specification, and most of the frameworks that interact with Java objects, they expect you to have getters and setters. So depending on your use case, you think, well, maybe I really need a getter for that, then I should be creating. But most of the times, you should be creating a setter, because when you create a setter, any piece of code in any part of the system can just get there and change the property of your value. Sometimes you need a setter because the framework imposes you to do so, but most of the time you shouldn't. Okay, so with this in mind, let's try to minimize the mutability. So first I have a number, an order number, and you think, can it be any integer? Okay, can it be very big? Can it be negative? Can it be 0? So that's one of the implications. And the traditional way of trying to solve this problem, I still use an integer. Then I'll keep using like properties like not null, and many other different constraints that I can add to my business model. This is not the proper way to handle, because I am allowing my business model to have like an invalid value. If it's supposed to be positive, I could add a -1 value here, and this class would only be validated by an external framework, like using bean validation. Or maybe it would only be validated when I committed this class to my database and I had a restriction on my database. I had the constraint, then it will trigger in your face an exception saying, well, you had some invalid data on the database. We shouldn't be doing that. And so one of the principles of domain-driven design is that you never allow an invalid object to be created, right? How can we do that? We're going to create a custom type. So it's not an integer. I need to create what? An order number. Because this property only allows proper order numbers to be set. Then I'm going to create another number. Let's create a class. Order number. It's serializable. Does it matter if I have another number 5 and another order number 5? Do they have different meaning? I don't think so in this case, so it could be replaceable. So order number clearly is a value object. So how do I create an immutable value object? Because value objects are immutable by default. So maybe here order number internally should have an integer value, int value, because internally is stored of that. It must be immutable. So I'm going to add a final here. If I'm adding final, I need to add a constructor. If I have a constructor, I don't like constructors. I think they are very bad prats in the Java programming language. But luckily, we have patterns for that. Instead of a constructor, I want to refactor this code to use a factor method. So I'll create a factor method. You might be wondering, why do you want to use a factor method? Just because you don't like the new keywords? Well, too. But one of the good things about the factor method is you can perform some very cool optimizations inside this method. First, when you create a factor method, you're not constrained to returning an object that is an order number. If later I decide that, well, maybe order numbers below 1,000 should be printed different from the order numbers which are above 1,000. Maybe I should have a different color for them. Okay, maybe then I can create another class, which is a subclass of order number, and return different objects as long as they have the same interface. Okay, so if I have here a factor method, I'm not, since Java has covariation, I'm not constrained to returning just order number instance. I can return any other object which is a child of order number 2. I could even later change order number for an interface or something like that. It would be very easy to refactor my code for here. So maybe order number creation is a very expensive computation process. So maybe I don't want to be creating a new order number every time I receive a new value. Maybe I should be creating a cache. Maybe I should be implementing the fly width design pattern to create for some kind of special order numbers, which I know that are commonly used. I don't want to create a new object. I just want to return always the same object, so I could create an internal cache. And I wouldn't have to change a single line of code outside order number, because the responsibility for creating order numbers are from the order number class. So everything is hidden and is encapsulated. And also, I never allow an order number to be created incorrectly. So if I say that order numbers must always be positive, I could say here I want to check the arguments. Which, by the way, I'm using Google Guava, which is a very nice library. It has some very nice collections and some very nice utility methods like check arguments. I have to say the value must be more than 0. Okay? And when I try to create an order number, we call this fail fast. So if you receive the wrong value, and if you want to validate if it's a proper value or not, you should be receiving an error when you try to create a new object, not when you try to use the object. Because that's the traditional anemic domain model way. You just set a property, and when you check that when you're using that, if it's different than null, if it's greater than 0, you should be doing all of this kind of validations when you try to create the objects, so you can never have an invalid object in your system, right? So here I'm checking the argument. If it could be null, in this case it can't be null. I could check it in another way and throw another kind of exception. Just by the way, check argument just verifies this Boolean expression, and if it's not properly, if it's false, then it throws an illegal argument exception. So the exceptions become even more clear in our object. So what else? I want to do that. A proper value object must implement equals, because I want to call the equals. So this is one of the possible ways of implementing equals in Java. Order number other receives object. So we also have from Guava initially, and now in Java 8 we have some cool methods, objects.equals. I can do that using java.util. I can add this dot value, other dot value. Okay. Return if I want to create a hash code method. I can code that using two. Can you see that? Okay. I can return objects hash this dot value, and if I want maybe toString. ToString is another cool thing. ToString, many people think that the ToString method is supposed to be used to present information to the user. No, it's not. ToString is something that you use for yourself. If you want to log a statement, if you want to debug something, ToString method provides you the value that you need to check if your system is behaving properly. So for ToString, I have Guava has like this more objects class, ToString helper. This maybe I can add like value equals value and toString. That's a very nice way for me to be creating toString method. But if I really want, because if you think about who has the responsibility of presenting the order number to the user, maybe it's the order number by itself. I want to create a new class just to format the information that I want to present to the user. And there is one not widely known interface in Java which was created just for that, which is formatable. So formatable should be preferred way for you to present the information to your user, because here you have a lot of information. Here, if you want to internationalize the string that you present to the user, you can do that. If you want to present like for internationalization purposes, different number formats, because you know, like in the US, you use comma and then dot, but in the rest of the world use dot and then comma. Maybe these kind of things, you have this information here. You know which language you are supposed to be using. You can have like information like flags, width, and precision. Then you can check the Java doc, which kind of information do you have. But I could just do that formatter.format2. Then it uses like the printf syntax, which is just in case is also a formatter. And I can say that I want to print like this. If I want to have decimal separators, or anything else, I could be using all of this information inside this method. That's what the formatter2 method was created. And I think that's it. That's a valid value object. It's immutable. It has a nice factor method. It should be properly used. So here I have then, if I want to that, then maybe I can create it. If I need to expose the information on the interface, maybe I can create a getter for number. Do I need to create a getter for ID? I don't think ID should be exposed to the user, because it should be an internal property of your database. And then maybe initially you shouldn't be exposing order ID. Maybe later when we're discussing, I won't be able to discuss with you today, when we're discussing specifications and queries, or how can you query the data from your database, maybe you could use the ID, but for today we don't need that. So what else? Order. I need a way to be constructing orders, so I don't allow invalid orders to be created. And if order number is a mandatory property, then maybe I need a constructor for that. I only allow this to be used. I also, again, I really don't like plain constructors. I want to refactor that as a factor method, and I want to check here, no order can be created with a proper order number. I don't need to check the order number more, because if that I receive a value of object of order number, I know that it's correct. I just need to check that it's not null. Okay, I receive here, check not null number. I can never receive a null order number. But you might be thinking this is not a valid JPA entity, because valid JPA entities requires a default constructor, but you're never going to use the default constructor. You're just going to use that for the JPA purposes. So I'm going to create here a default constructor and never use that, okay? Not order number, order, okay? Order. Oops. Yeah. The specification requires that it should be protected, but if you think at least on Hibernate, it doesn't need to be protected. It can have like default visibility. Okay. So this is a valid order number, that order which has an order number. It's mandatory. I'm checking that on the constructor, but orders are not that useful if you don't have items for that, right? And we could be adding items. Another discussion should be an order item, an entity, or a value object. That's another valid discussion. It really depends on your business domain model. Then I'm asking to you, I'll create here. Order should have a list of order item, which I call items. So here I have a new list which could be exposed, order item. Let's create this class because it should be an order item. Also must be serializable. And maybe I should have a product as a string, an integer amount, and a big decimal value. I'm using primitive properties today because I don't have enough time to model all of them, but product clearly should be another custom type. Amount should clearly be another custom type. The same for big decimal should be a custom type. Okay. And you think, oh, isn't big decimal already a custom type? It's not a primitive value? No. Okay, you should be considered because it's just plain old Java object. You should be creating your own class for money, for example, because if you want to have some rounding calculations, you don't want to expose the rounding calculation all over your code. You want your own class money to know how to perform the rounding calculations, and it really should be encapsulated, right? So you should be creating properties for that. I won't do this for this class because of lack of time. But let's think, if I have one order item with a product, an amount, and a value, and I have another object of that which has the same product, amount, of value, are they equal or not? I think that for most business use case, I should be able to replace one with the other. It wouldn't change the meaning of the system. So in this use case, I think that order item should be also a value object, or else if it was an entity, I would have to mark that as an entity, but I don't think it is, because an entity needs an ID, and if it has an ID, it has a different life cycle and everything else. Since the order items should be replaceable, I don't think that's an entity. And how do I model that with JPA? I can call that order item is an embeddable. But didn't you say that order had many different order items? How do I model a list of embeddable objects? Luckily, from JPA 2.0 and forward, I guess, we have this new kind of mapping element collection, which you can use. It's very useful because you don't need to map an ID to your collection. So you can just interchange the objects, and the state of information is maintained by the list instead of being maintained by the foreign key of your order item, okay? So that's a valid way for you to be creating a value object here. Also, value objects should be immutable, but it's very hard to manipulate fields with final values using JPA. So another way for you to create immutable object, instead of making all properties final, is that through your code, you guarantee that the state cannot be changed at all. So how can you do that? You don't provide setters, and you provide a beautiful constructor with all of the values. And again, I don't like constructors, so I'm going to create a factory method. And I should be checking again. I could implement a check not null product. Let me check not null. Okay, I could check the amount, check the value, and everything else not null, but I won't do that for because of the time. I should be implementing equals, hash code to string, all of this method. They must be implemented for all of your entities and value objects. I just shown you one. I'll save the time of this one here. So, but sometimes order item, you need to expose the properties of the order item in your interface. So in this case, I'll create getters. But of course, since it's immutable, I can have the setters. Right? So it's almost a value object. If I finish the implementation of the proper things with the product, amount, and value, create other value objects too, then it would be a valid value object. But for the purpose of this demo, yeah, I think it's okay. So I have an order item. I'm saying here, and that's it. I go back to the order class. And you might be thinking, how do you expose the information or the item? So maybe I need to sometimes expose the list to the interface. I should have a get items. So many people just do that. Let's create a getter for items and get items. But the problem is that by default, Java collections are mutable. So if I allow my item list to be exposed this way, any piece of code in my system can get to here and change the item list, which is a leak. That's a leaky abstraction. I don't want to do that. Maybe I should return it only in an immutable copy of items. Okay, so I'm returning, that's another Guava class, an immutable list. I'm returning a list that cannot be changed outside of that, but I need a way to be adding items to my order. I need a way to be removing items from my order. How do? I need to create methods for that, because the only way for me to change the state of the order is through the order class. So maybe I want to create here an header. I can create a public order add item, and I pass that an order item. Okay, and I just say items. Item, again, I can't do that with a null, check not null item. I can receive a null value for validity reasons. 15? Okay, 15 minutes. It's very hard to see anything with the spot here. And return this. So I'm checking maybe add item, okay, it's valid for now, but then I realized that I got a new business requirement, and the people told me, oh, if you're adding like a product with the same value, and you check that you are adding another item with the same product and same value, you shouldn't have duplicate products on your list. You should be instead adding up the amount of things that you do. Well, if I didn't have a proper encapsulation, I will have to search through all my business code to check who is manipulating the item list. But if I did, using immutability, the only place in my system that I have to change to add this new business capability is the add item. So maybe I could be checking like if items contains item, then I should be implemented the code. Well, items.remove, and maybe I should add order item of, then I should be creating another object with the same, copy the product and copy the value and just add up the amount. I won't be implementing this, but I hope it's pretty obvious that you should be coding this here, right? This is the proper way for you to add this new business capability, but I won't be implementing that because of time. And there's another question. Before that, I consider two items to be equal if they had the same product, the same amount, and the same value, right? But then this new business requirement changed the meaning of what is an equal item. So the guys told me now that, well, two items are equal if they have the same products and the same value. So it really depends on the capability. So equality on the equals and hash code method really depends on your business meaning, not on your object meaning, okay? So that's why you should be modeling your identities. That's how proper code works. So I'll just remove that because that's another exercise that we can do later with our code. Another thing that is interesting, you see, some people think about we could have something called, we have some law, which is not really a law, but a property of some systems, Demeter's law, which means don't talk to strangers. An object should never talk to the dependencies of the other objects, just to its direct references. It's a very debatable and questionable law, because sometimes I'm one of that pragmatic persons. I believe that having a better API is much better than following Demeter's law, but again, it's very much debatable. You have some people with some very strong opinions. Sometimes I prefer to be pragmatic. Suppose now that if I was following Demeter's law, I wouldn't be able to know the amount of items that I have here in my list. Okay, I would never call like get items get size. It's not allowed by Demeter's law. Then I will have, well, I want to know the number of items that I have in the order. I will have to get integer get order count, then return items dot size. Okay, I should be implementing a method by that. But then I got a new business requirement. Somebody told me that now you have not only the items by itself, you need a new capability. I need a list of discounted items. Okay, if a new element collections, then what do you do? I need a get discounted items. Copy of discounted items. Maybe now I need a get order count. I need a get discounted items or count. So no, it's not get order, get item count. Then I will need like public integer, get discounted items count return discounted item.size. Then somebody, oh, I need another property of that. Maybe I need the total amount of the product amount or values. Then I would like public big decimal get total value get item total value. Then people would say, well, you need to get items stream dot collect collectors there's grouping by, and I have a map. I get the item order item. I'll get the get value. Start with big decimal dot 0. And what do we do? Big decimal add. Is that correct? No? No, well, I think I forgot how to do that. Okay? Let's get a simple one. Well, I forgot the stream, but return 0. Suppose I would have to interact with the list and sum all of the items, so I would return here. Or I could use a for. Yeah, I wanted to be fancy, and I just forgot the syntax. Yeah, so maybe you should be adding, but then you need the total value of the item. Then you will need the discounted items too. You will be copying and pasting code everywhere you had it. Discounted item. Then what you have here? Bulky API. Okay, your class starts to be big, you're not really adding some value to that, and maybe instead of just having to follow the emitters law, we could create another class for this behavior. So who told me, maybe instead of just returning a plain old list of items, I could be creating another class. So instead of just using that, I want to create an order items class. And let's create this class. Which luckily while we have another class, it extends and forwarding lists or what? Order item. Okay, I can have a private value port. Okay, I can create a constructor. I can implement the method so it stops complaining, delegate, return value. Again, I should immutable. I can do that differently. I could use like return an immutable copy here, or I can just read the value because I'm checking. I don't want this, I want a factory method too. And what can I do? Can't be null. And when I'm assigning here, I want to value, instead of passing just the plain old value, I want it to be an immutable list. Copy of value, okay? So I just check it here, I have a forward list, then maybe instead of just having to multiply of the methods that I had inside my class here, I could just say that oh, in fact, here, for JPA reasons, still has to be order item. But since I have encapsulation, this method doesn't need to return this list anymore. It can be an order items list. Okay? Since it extends list, I didn't break any piece of my code. I just add a new behavior for that. And I could add that with discounted items too. And since I don't have just to return just a plain immutable list.copy of, I can return order items of items, and I can return here order items dot of discounted items. So now I can remove these methods that I created here and add them to where? To the order item class. So I can create here a method public integer get size and return value dot size. Okay, so my API, instead of having multiple different methods, somebody could just create like a client method. If I was to create like order of order number of 5, I could just be calling get items get size. And I could be doing the same with getting discounted items dot size. Okay, should you be doing this kind of collection, modifying and extending your list, etc. for all of your occasions? It really depends on your business models, but I did that sometimes in the past. Depending on how your business model behaves, this is a very neat solution for a lot of different problems, because when you have many behaviors being added on the list, when you have to add a lot of calculation and computation inside your and manipulate your list with a lot of different methods, this becomes a very useful use case of how should you be encapsulating your behavior. Okay, another way for me to change the state of my order class, maybe I want to apply here, I want to add some special price tag on some items or some of that. Maybe I could need to apply an operation. Maybe I could add, now I have discounted items. Maybe I would need to apply a public void discount and set like a big decimal value or discount. Okay, I would create maybe a discount class. Maybe I would need to perform an operation. Maybe I would need to, instead of just applying a discount, I would to add shipping costs. And maybe they told me that, well, the shipping cost can be by the item or can be by the total order, you know. This kind of behavior should be added inside the order here. But if you see, if for any business method that you have for order, if you just start adding methods here, your class will be simply huge. The first option for you, I'm adding a new capability for my class, is to always add a business method here in my order class. But as time passes and your business model evolves and your class starts to be too big, you start to have a lot of business methods inside the order class, maybe then you need to externalize the operations. And how can I do that? It used to be harder in the past. But now, since Java 8, for example, if I want to apply lots of different operations inside a list or a collection of elements, I can use some pretty neat like functional interface of Java 8 to be applying these things. So instead of adding multiple methods for discount or shipping costs, here I can just add one. So maybe I want to apply an operation, public void, apply, and I say I want to apply an order operation here. So my items would be, okay, items, receive items, string, dot map, operation, dot collect, collectors, to list. Okay, it's complaining because operation, he doesn't know what is operation. Let's try to implement that. So I'm going to create, maybe I want to create an interface, maybe I want to create an enum. Really depends on your use case. I'm just going to create to show you a very simple use case. Suppose that I want to limit the kind of operations that can be applied to my order for now. Later, if my system increases, I might change this thing. But since I'm creating a custom type, it would be very easy for me to change later. So just created a num because in my system currently I only have two operations, shipping cost and discount. And operation is going to implement a function which maps an order item to another order item. Okay, and I need to implement, so I'm going to have an operation called discount, and I'm going to have another operation called shipping costs. Which is one of the cool things that only Java can do for you. If you show that to a C# developer, it's just crazy. Okay, then what do? I just have to implement the apply methods, which means that order item, or when I give a discount to something, maybe I should be performing some behavior. But if it only depends on the order item, I could say, well, I'm just giving a 10% discount, so return what? I'll return a new order item, which uses the same product, the same amount, but now with the value, I'll get value dot multiply, new big decimal, 0.9. Okay, I'm applying a 10% discount on all of the items. And maybe for the shipping cost, I could be adding some specific behavior. Okay, maybe the shipping cost is just like 20% of the price. I would be implementing right here. And for me to be using this kind of operation, here, I would just create, like, for that, I would be creating order of order number of 5. If I want to apply something, I just say apply order operation dot discount. Then all of the items, I have 2 now, all of the items will receive a 10% discount, okay? This is just some of the tricks that you can apply when you're trying to use this kind of domain-driven design techniques. One of, just to finish, because I think, how many time do I have? Okay, so maybe I want to, you see, this code wouldn't work with default JPI. I need some way for me to integrate my business domain model with a framework like JPA, or if I want to expose this information to the interface, maybe I have a JSF, maybe I have a Spring MVC application that I want to expose information to, maybe I have a REST endpoint, but the REST endpoints or the JSF application also don't know how to interpret and manipulate order numbers or order items or something like this. Maybe I need like something that we call an anti-corruption layer, which prevents me from integrating framework stuff inside my business domain model. Then for some, if I want my order number to be mapped correctly into the JPA, luckily, order number, I can say I can create an order number attribute converter. An attribute converter were added to the JPA specification version 2, which is one way for you to map custom types to your database types. Before that, if you used the Hibernate, you needed to implement an user type class, but now you can just create an attribute converter, and just in case you have 2 methods, convert to database column and convert to entity attribute, you just say, well, I have an order number, how do I convert to a database type like integer? If I have an integer from the database, how do I convert that to an order number thing? And basically, I'm just doing this, but you see, I have no way of extracting an integer from my order number class. So basically, people would do like attribute dot get value, because if you go to the order number class, the internal property isn't that value. But if I just expose the get value, it implicitly means to anybody using my class that internally I'm using an integer implementation. That's why I choose to expose this kind of things. Instead of get value, I'm saying, well, convert this order number to an integer value. Okay? And I say, I create a method called toInteger, because later I could add a toLong or toBig decimal. It just means that I have a valid order number object, and I want to convert that, if it has meaning, to another type of object. I'm not exposing the internal get value information. So in Prats, the methods are implemented the same, but in semantics, it has a different meaning to the clients of my class. So it could be just return value. And the same way, if I want to expose this information to the JSF application or to a Spring MVC, I will also need to create a Spring converter. Or if I want to expose that as a JSF application, I would be using a faces converter. Okay? I just have implemented here for other business model class. If I have a name class, which is another, I have a person, I have a name. Name is also a value object. If I want to expose this information, I would use a faces converter class. And of course, it's exposed here. And that's just some of the tips that I want to show you of how can you properly create a business model using domain-driven designs, entities, and value objects, and adding meaningful behavior to your business domain classes instead of doing everything inside your service classes. But again, I'm barely scratching the surface. We're just touching a bit of domain-driven design. Because some important questions that you might be having in your mind is that, well, how do I perform validation if the user typed a wrong order number or a wrong name or a wrong surname? How do I tell my user on the interface that it was an invalid value? Can I do that because I don't have beam validation anymore? Yes, of course, and in fact, I have to tell you, it's much better than using beam validation because you can add this business logic to your code. And another important thing, I'm saying that I'm a fan of like factory methods, but factory methods are very easy if I have like one parameter, one internal property. But if I get the order item, it's a very simplistic model, isn't it? It just has free properties, but if I added more 2 properties, I would have 5. Is it better to have a method with 5 parameters? It starts to become very hard to write and read your code. So that's important questions. So maybe if I have more than 3, I think 3 is bearable. If I have more than 3 properties, maybe I shouldn't be using a factor method. Maybe I should be using a builder class. That's one of the ways for me to be exposing. Maybe not all of my properties can be immutable, like person, or for example, or like order. Maybe I want to change the address of the order. For the person class too, maybe I want to change the name of the person, not because I'm changing the property, but because the first time I create the object, I typed the wrong name. I mistyped the name. Clearly, it's something that I want to change that. How do I change internal properties that should be encapsulated, but I still have to use frameworks, a REST framework, or I still have to use a Vue framework like JSF or something like that? These are very important questions. Maybe sometimes some of the possible solutions, I can create mutable wrapper classes just to encapsulate the change. Or domain-driven design also has another opportunity for you. Maybe if I want to change the address of my order, maybe I need to receive some external information. That's when things start to get even more interesting. Like I can create what we call in domain-driven design terminology, I can create a domain event. So my class would be here, public void receive, would receive an order event. An order event could have many different implementations. For example, shipping address change order event. Okay, so then the order event would know how to change the internal behavior, the internal state of my order. That's when things start to get interesting. And if you think, why am I talking about all of this? I think it's a benefit by itself to be coding like this. But then you'd realize that, well, if I'm starting to create business domain events in my model, well, who told me that these business domain events need to be local? Okay, maybe they can distribute it. Maybe you can add a message broker so everybody can listen to these business domain events. So maybe now I can start, they don't need everything to be local. Maybe I can start to distribute the things. Maybe I could even start to use microservice for that, right? So that's when things start to get interesting. In fact, that's why I truly believe that the best way for you to split your old monolith into microservices is to first model your business domain logic with proper bounded context, domain-driven design, bounded context, domain events. If you did that properly, you have like a very cohesive, low-coupled implementation. You can extract that to a separate implementation and start to broadcast your events through a message broker. That's very interesting questions, but again, we're just starting to give you some tips of how can we do that. And that's all that I could present for you in the time that I had today. I hope you have all enjoyed, and I think I'm over time already. But if you have any questions later, I'm available. And again, we'll have the book signing right now on the Red Hat booth. And thank you very much.